What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over an advanced minimap method for our first-person shooter tutorial series. So, we're essentially going to be able to make our own custom minimap, not using a camera, but actually an image that we make. And then we're going to be able to traverse the world, and our location on the image is going to change with it. So, for those of you that have watched the third-person and action RPG tutorial series, it's going to be very similar to that in this episode because we're doing the same methods to get this onto the screen. It will be a little bit different because of how we're going to relate it back to our first-person shooter logic. But going forward, we can use this a lot more for things like radar and other mechanics that are found in a lot of first-person shooters that aren't necessarily found in the third-person world. But the main thing that we're doing today is making sure that we can get a custom image and relate it to the world coordinates as we move around in it. Okay? So, we can go ahead and get started, but before we do, we have many episodes to go. But we've come quite a long way since the start. If you'd like to get caught up in the series, I'll link the entire playlist right here in the top right corner. You can click it to see everything we've done and everything that's in this playlist currently. Otherwise, you can click right here if you want to check out the basic minimap episode we did for this first-person shooter tutorial series. The basic minimap does have quite a few things that are important for today. Even though it's a different method, we're still going to show you everything that you need. But the basic minimap will fill you in on some of the gaps of the differences between the two, which one you want to use, and how you can add it to your HUD. Okay, one final thing. You'll notice that Unreal Engine is now upgraded to Unreal Engine 5. So this template is UE5, and a little bit back we made an episode where we actually updated the FPS tutorial from UE4 to UE5, and then you saw that I still had some more episodes in UE4. That's because I had already pre-recorded and pre-done some of the logic in UE4, but now we're officially caught up and everything still works based on that episode. So if you haven't already, feel free to use the UE5 version of your FPS template going forward, because that's what we're going to be doing. However, it should still work in both UE4 and UE5 for all future episodes as well. Okay, so like I said, let's get started. Now the first thing we need to do is get our image of the minimap. This can be simple or tricky depending on how we want to do it. So the easiest way to do it, I think, is to literally grab an image of the overhead of the map. The easiest way to get an image is to basically put a camera above the map, determine what it's capturing, save that out to a 2D image instead of the camera view with the depth, and then customize it yourself and re-import it back with the proper orientation, size, all those things. We are going to actually use a scene capture component 2D to make this work. So the easiest way to do this is, whether in UE4 or UE5, it doesn't matter. You need to just add an item to the project, and what we want to add is a scene capture component 2D. So UE5 might be new to you if this is the first time you're doing it. So if you have to do that, what I like to do is click on this button up here, quickly add to the project, all classes, and then scroll down and find the class I want. This is like you're trying to drag something to the scene. So we're going to grab a scene capture component 2D, click it, and it's going to add it to the screen. Okay. Now, I'm going to delete that one because I already have one, and I'm going to show you what I've done to the one I have to get it looking down and in the right orientation. So, when it comes in, it may have some values for location, rotation, and scale. It's fine if it does. It doesn't really matter where you have this, but we have to be consistent in our sizes. But the most important thing is this. This is our scene capture component 2D. So for the location, I went ahead and zeroed the X and the Y, just because I figured I don't need to have these fake values. Like, it had negative 150 or 150, I believe, on the X. So it was originally over there, but it doesn't matter. I don't want to worry about all these extra variables that we don't care about. At the end of the day, the only thing we care about is getting the top-down view. So I just reset my location to 0 and 0. For the Z, which is my height, my vertical location, I put it to 1000. That way it was up in the air and could see the entire thing. I know it doesn't really look like it could see the entire thing, but we're going to use something called orthographic width, which is going to allow us to see this essentially as a 2D plane as opposed to this depth. So it'll be able to reach everywhere. Again, you'll see that in a second, so don't worry. But just make sure that you put it so that the camera is above the highest thing that you want to be able to see. For example, I have these block pillars. Well, that won't really show up in the render target too well. Technically, it will show up, but I wouldn't be able to see the top the same because the camera is obviously below it. So anything, your highest point that you want to show off, make sure your camera's above that. 1000 is good for me because it's higher than the walls, which is the thing I care about the most. Alright, now going back to the scene capture component, now we have to make sure that it's tilted down, and really we want it to be facing the orientation that we consider correct. What I mean by that is you can see that this is the camera, so the x-axis is positive this direction. I'm considering that forward. Essentially, that's like my north in this case. Okay, so this way that I'm walking, this is like north. This is my positive direction. So I want the camera to have this as the forward direction. This is the backward direction. And so for me, when I put it into the scene, this is the rotation that I have. 0 rotation on the X and the Z. And let's say we start this at 0. It's going to look like this. Okay, you can see that this is facing the proper direction, but it's looking forward. It needs to be looking down over top of everything. So to accomplish this, we can do a simple rotation on the Y. Now, you can play around with it and get it. If I do 90, obviously that's looking up. That's wrong. 180, of course, is not going to be looking down then either. And then 270 is just right. Looking straight down at everything going on. Okay. And so with that, now our camera is in place. And we have to do one other thing with this actual scene capture component. We'll be able to then generate an image so you can see if it looks the way you want it to. So on the scene capture component, right below the transform section, there's a projection section, which normally has perspective as the projection type. Now, this projection type determines how it's going to display something back to the view of the camera. So if it's perspective, it'll have the 3D elements and all that. If it's orthographic, it's going to display it as a 2D image without height, and that's really what we want. So I'm going to go into, I made a Minimap folder where I'm going to put all my Minimap stuff. So within our Minimap folder here, we have advanced and basic. So basic is what we did in the previous episode. I'm not going to be touching these things, these render targets or the material, because I don't want to get rid of the basic render target behavior. We don't necessarily need the basic Minimap again in this series. The advanced Minimap will do everything we need and a lot more. But if you ever want to reference this or go back to it, you can keep it. So I'm going to keep it there for tutorial sake. But we're going to be working in what I added in the advanced Minimap today. So we actually only need one thing. We don't have to make material out of it right now. We just need to make a render target. So you can add textures, render target. And I've called it advanced Minimap render target just so I could distinguish it from the other one. Now on this scene capture component, as I said, we set it to orthographic. We're going to go ahead and add the advanced Minimap to the texture target that is here. This will initially be nulled out. It'll just say none like this when you have your scene capture. You can literally drag it in, or you can actually search for it as well. You should only have a few options. So there we go. So I have my advanced Minimap render target here. And at this point, you should be able to get an image out of your render target. For me, I've never been able to load this in UE5, no matter how long I sit, which is a little strange. But the real point that we're trying to make here is that this little thumbnail actually gets filled out, and you can see that it's the entire map. If it's not the entire map, you're going to want to change the ortho width until you reach a point where it is. So if I make it bigger, you can see this will update, and you can see there's more space around, but I have the entire map. in there. I can keep changing this value as much as I want to play around with it, and I'll update after a few seconds. 5,000 seems to be good for basically all of the Unreal template, the starter kits that you can use. So 5,000 is just usually a good value, but you can get whatever you want. If you've already added more to your map, that's fine. Basically, you're just going to want to make sure the entire map is encompassed in this. Doesn't really matter if it's directly in the center or not, just as long as the entire map is in there, we can work with that. So now, once you have this, where the scene capture component is getting a view of the scene, and it's being displayed to a render target, what you can do is right-click on a render target, go to Asset Actions, and you can actually export the asset. Okay? Export it to a type. So they have this HDR type. You can also do it to a few other types. I just keep it as HDR and open it with GIMP. You have a few options here, but I use GIMP because it's free and easy enough to edit with. So I'll provide the link to GIMP in the description if you'd like to use what I use for this part. But basically you're going to need to open this file and edit it, or otherwise have a map file that you can use for your minimap. What I'm doing here is I'm going to export this. So I have a folder on my computer that I export it to that typically is in pictures. I go to YouTube, Extra, and then I have FPS Minimaps. I have a section here. Now, I call it FPS Minimap render target.hdr. I'm not going to overwrite this one. But once you save this out, you can then go to that file on your computer. I'm going to actually open it up with GIMP. You can go to that file on your computer. You can open it up with GIMP. So you can right click on it, open with, and then choose GIMP. You can choose another app and go find GIMP. You can automatically set this to open with GIMP. You have a lot of choices. But I'm going to choose another app. You can do keep using GIMP, or you can go and try and find the app. If you've never done this before, I'll show you how. So it's going to lead you to your programs file folder, which is where GIMP will install by default. So you can actually go to it and choose it. You're going to want to go to the binaries and do GIMP 2.10 exe. Okay, once you do that, you can open up this file in GIMP. So that's how you can open an HDR file very easily. Our stage from above. Things are a little bit different because this is an image that the render target caught, but this is basically exactly what we were receiving from that scene capture. So now what you want to do is make a stylized version of this. Okay, so you can go and do whatever you want with it. I've made one, so I'll jump to that in a second, but I'll show you just some general tips that I used. So basically, I use the color picker tool that's all the way on the left and that's being cut off, but the leftmost tool right here. Let's see if I can shrink this for you so you can see everything correctly. There we go. Okay. So use the color picker tool, and then I usually just pick like the color black or something simple to outline things. I was using this as an outline tool, this little block. So then when I click my paintbrush, I can put these black splotches here. A lot slower than this, you know, so it's a lot cleaner. But I can really just put these splotches here and outline parts of the map. I can then rotate it, put it at an angle of like 90. That way you can get the vertical ones. There you go. Again, I'm doing this super quick, but you can do this, you know, you can make this as advanced as you want. You can outline the actual walls if you'd like. You don't have to. I actually didn't. But anyway, something like this. And then after you're happy with the actual image that you have, what I did was I cleaned up this section. So you can technically hide like static meshes and things. That way they're not showing up in the render target. And that's probably what we'll want to do when we have these huge maps with all these involved. But I wasn't worried about it for now. What I actually did was I took the smudge tool and I kept my block even, and I just went and I literally went over the grass like this to give it that stylized look. So I kind of just smudged everything together, keeping the walls intact. And that way I could give it this stylized feel. Now the reason I'm showing you this is if you just want a little template you can use for your map, you can do what I'm doing here, and it looks pretty good. But when you actually go through this, and you're probably going to want to have someone go through this and spend a lot of time on it, make the map look really nice. I did this in about 5 minutes my first time through, so I'm just showing you a method you could use. That looks good enough. That's actually not what I'm going to be using, so I'm going to close this one. I will open the one for you that I was actually using. So this is my own version that I made for the FPS tutorial, so it looks a little bit better than that version. And what I did is I just blended everything in here together, so grass is basically just this green yellow combo, and then I blended a little bit of this stuff too, just so it has some of that stylized feel to it. And then I just put a black outline around these two walls so that these can have like, oh, this is a border or a boundary or something that's actually here, just to give it a little bit of like height, even though we're trying to avoid height since we just want a 2D image. Okay. Now, once you're happy with your image, what you can do is go to File here. You go to File, Export As, and then you can choose where you want this to be. So this is the image that we're going to import to Unreal. Since you can easily make changes when you add to the map, you can just grab another picture from that render target and edit it. You may want to just keep this saved somewhere directly in the Unreal folder. For me, I put it elsewhere because I keep track of things differently for source control and stuff like that. Not worth getting into right now. But you can put this directly in your Unreal folder where you want to import this. That way, every time you export this, it just automatically goes to Unreal. Up to you. Otherwise, just save it. Make sure it's a PNG. So when you're typing in the name, you can just type in the name like I have and do literally .png. Save it somewhere. Make sure you move it to the folder that you want within Unreal if you didn't already when you exported it. So for me, where I put it is I have an Art UI Minimap folder. And so I've actually put it right here. This is the actual image. As soon as you put it within the folder, it'll upload to Unreal. You may get a prompt, do you want to import this in the bottom right? Make sure you check yes, you do. But otherwise, you don't have to change any settings or look for anything in particular. So this is what it looks like. Okay, so I have my image here in Unreal. That's the important part. That's what all that was for. At this point, you technically don't need that advanced minimap render target or the scene capture component. However, you can continuously use these to update your maps as the maps update. So you also might not want to get rid of them. I'm not going to get rid of them because we're going to be updating our maps. So I will use them again in the future. Now what we have to do is make a material out of this image so we can actually display it on the character HUD. So if you right click on the texture, when you import an image it comes in as a texture. You right click on a texture, you can do create material. It's going to make this. I called it M_minimap because minimap, M is a common prefix for materials, so basically material_minimap. That's what I called it. Now, when you open this up, this is where we're going to do all of our logic relating to the actual, like, changing the position on the minimap as the player moves. Because we're going to grab essentially where we are in relation to the player and then display, you know, pan the minimap, the material to that corresponding location. So we're going to have to do a lot with that. So get ready. Open up this material. There's a lot in here. We're going to focus on one thing just to start to make sure that you can get your material showing up. That way you can test it while we're going through this long process. Okay. So when you open this up initially, you're going to have a texture sample and a return node here for your material. That's it. We need to make sure that when we come into our material, if we don't have any of our nodes clicked, you'll have material, which will have, you might have to open it up, but you'll have this little section here in the details panel. And material domain will be surface. Make sure you change this to user interface. That's how we can display it on widgets. So you have to do that. And it also gives it a 2D feel as opposed to the sphere that is normally there. Okay. Once you do that, it might break the connection to this minimap node. It doesn't always. Sometimes it does. So just drag from the RGB back into the final color on the return here. And you should at least get an image. Doesn't have to look like mine. In fact, we can test and see what it looks like. It should look like that. Okay? And so now, you won't have this yet because you haven't added this to your character HUD. But now, if I don't do anything else, when I add this to my HUD, it's going to display the material, but the material won't move. So you can see it just displays the entire image that we made and edited with GIMP. Okay? So everything we're going to be doing is... everything we're going to be doing in here is to make it so this pans around based on the UVs that we pass into it. Simple enough. There's one thing we should make beforehand. You're going to see a lot of these throughout the series because we're going to be doing a lot more with this minimap. There's something called a material parameter collection. So let's go back to our minimap folder, and I've moved this because I actually put it in the wrong location, so that part's on me. But this NPC minimap is what we're going to be making. It's called a material parameter collection. And so what this does is this is going to store some of our default values and values that we have to keep track of when we're handling materials. It's basically a parameter list for materials. It's that simple. Okay, I put it with my minimap stuff, but you don't have to. You can put it anywhere you want. Essentially, you're going to add, go to materials, and add a material parameter collection. As it says here, it's a list of parameter names and their default values. Okay. Once you add it, I call it NPC, Material Parameter Collection, Minimap. All right, now, as we go in here, you're going to have basically scalar and vector parameters, and they're both going to be arrays with 0 elements in them. What we have to do is add the parameters that we want and set their values by default. So, we are going to add 4 values. So I went ahead and added an element 4 times. And I opened up each of the indices here. I have 0, 1, 2, and 3. And here's what I've called them. So first of all, I have size, which is 5,000. Let me explain why. On the scene capture component, we have an ortho width of 5,000. These should match. This ortho width should match the size that you're passing in. These have to be the same because this is the size that we have to work with, and this is the size that this camera captured. So if they link up, then we'll know that the dimensions are 1-to-1 with each other. We need an X and a Y position. That's how we're going to move through our UVs. We're going to use the character's location to go to the proper spot on the minimap. And then we need a zoom, which I can show you. If we change something in the zoom, then you can see it changes the actual value. When I changed it to 1.0 zoom, you can see it actually affected this. And now everything is kind of screwed up. It's not in the right spot anymore. Alternatively, if we change it to be smaller, then you can see that it's going to be way zoomed in and also off. Okay, so 0.5 is just a good spot here because what it's going to do is it's going to get the middle. We're basically going to be using this to get the middle section right now. So our position is going to be based off our character, and then the zoom will be relative to the size of this. That way we're always looking at it at the proper spot, no matter where we're at on the map. It'll make more sense, I believe, when we're doing the material. It'll definitely make more sense, though, in the following episodes, because we're going to be adding different levels of zoom to the minimap, which case you'll be able to modify that value, see the results. Regardless, these are the 4 things we need right now. The zoom is up to you, but the size really needs to match. Whoops. Really needs to match the size of the dimensions of the ortho width, because let's say we change this guy. even with the proper zoom, things are going to be off, because if I change the size, even though it looks right from a zoom perspective, the size is right, the coordinates are going to be offset a little bit more. Okay. You can see how they're offset. So this really should link up as much as possible. All right. Now with that in mind, we can go and work on our material, which is the main thing we have to cover today. So I'm going to go to my material here. And let's start going over this logic. So the first thing that I've done is I've grabbed all the materials, material collection parameters, because we're going to need to use all of them in this material. It's actually pretty simple what we're doing here, but it just looks confusing because it's just a bunch of add and subtract, so I'll do my best to describe it as we're going through it. So let's go and grab all 4 of these guys, okay? The way we do this is we type in collection parameter, or just collection, click this guy. And then when he comes up, you'll be able to choose the collection that you want. I only have one, so I want my NPC minimap. And then I want to grab the variable here. So what I've done is I've grabbed one for each. Okay. So literally I have zoom, X pause, Y pause, and size. Okay. So, like I said, it's simple enough. You want to go through, you want to get 4 of these, one with each of the names. That way we have them. The other thing we need to do is we need to, remember, we're putting something into the UVs on this texture, which just relate to the width and the height of the texture. 0, 0 is the top left of the texture, 1, 1 is the bottom right, 0, 1 is the top right, and 1, 0 is the bottom left. It's important to note because that's how we're going to move around this texture. Okay. So what we need to do is start with our texture coordinate here. And the way you do this is you can right click and you can either type texture coord and try and find it, or just search for texture coordinate. And it's a node here that is already made in Unreal. You don't have to do anything with it. But just get this guy. That's going to be our introductory node here. So it's going to grab the node, the texture coordinates, and we're going to use them to figure out where we should be on this actual image so that we can move around the minimap. So using our zoom collection parameter, what we need to do is get to the center of the map. Remember, like I said, the zoom is really used to determine where we're at. So not where we're at in a location, but where we need to be in the center of the map. Because as you notice here, the minimap is bigger than this, okay? This is not the entire texture that I passed into it, but the zoom is going to get us to a point where we are at the middle of the map. We can see that no matter where we're at, so we're not offset to the left or the right. We're not too big, too small. We're where we want to see, how much we want to be able to see from the player's perspective when it goes on the HUD. So we need to make sure we multiply that, first of all, by where we're at on the texture coordinate. This section of nodes here, this multiply, which by the way, you can literally do this like any blueprint. If you're not familiar with materials, you just drag off of a node and then type what you want. So I want to multiply, then I pass in my zoom into B. So I think it's easiest to show this as we go each step, because you can continuously plug things into the UVs here, skipping the other nodes. You see I disconnected it from this one, and you can see what it gets you. So when we initially do this multiplication right off the bat, what we're doing is we're zooming into that amount. So 0.5 is getting half and half. So half this texture coordinate, or essentially instead of doing 1 and 1, we're going 0.5 to 0.5. Okay, so you can see it brings the zoom in, and we have half of the visibility that we had before. From here, we need to grab the offset of the zoom, because understand that when we have this here, even if we were to play this like this, right? Let's say we play the game like this. We're just stuck permanently in the top left corner because that zoom is correct, but it is not going to be moving with the character's movement. So we need to have an offset that we want to display from the top left corner based on the character position. Okay. So this is getting the proper field of view on that texture, if you will. And then this is going to be grabbing the offset that we can actually have from the top left corner of the image. Then we're going to use these positions to get the proper spot to apply the offset. Okay, so we're going to multiply our zoom by 0.5 to cut it in half. It's going to be trying to get to the center of, based on where put the player in the center, based on where the center of this is. Not the center of the whole map, but the center of the view we have now. Then we're going to subtract. Okay, we're going to drag off the zoom and subtract the multiplication value. This is because this is the offset. So we're now taking the 0.5 and we're subtracting this value because, remember, this is trying to get the center of our field of view where the player is, but we want to put that based on where the zoom is. So this is going to be the offset. It's going to change with the player position. All right. Now, with that done, we have our offset, but you won't really be able to see anything. If I plug this in now, it's just going to put you at a random spot because this value without the multiplication doesn't mean anything. So you can't really check your progress too much there, as it won't do anything yet. But what we can do is add our X and Y positions, like I mentioned, based on where the character's at, to clean this up a little bit. Okay. This part's pretty simple now. So to convert from the world space to the map here, remember I said our sizes should be equal, the ortho width and the size within the material parameter collection. If we take our X and Y position that the character's at and divide them by the size or the dimensions of the minimap, then we get exactly where those are at. So it's super simple. We know where the X and Y position is at on the map, and we need to relay that back to the minimap so we can actually display the character icons there and move based on that value. Okay? So it's simple enough. We need to use our X position and our Y position and have a divide off both of them. And what we're dividing by is our size. Okay? So if we're at 100 units and our size is 5,000, then it's going to convert and say, yep, you're at the right spot on the minimap based on where you would be in the actual world. Next thing we're going to do is multiply our X position division. So X position divided by size, we're multiplying that by -1, hard-coded -1. Reason for this is because, remember I said that 0, 0 is at the top and 1, 1's at the bottom? Well, left of 0 is true, right of 1 is true, but top of 0 is not necessarily true in this case. So when we're traversing the world using the standard Unreal map here, you can see that X, positive X, is facing outward or forward as we'd expect. So it is a positive value when we're moving forward, but that would be moving us in the opposite direction when we look at it from a texture standpoint. If the top is 0, say we're staying at the center, the top is 0, the bottom is 1. As we move up in the world, our X value is positive, but on the texture, the X value of positive is moving down. So it's going to give you the opposite result. And we can test this, okay? So if we just play it without the multiplication, as I move up, the minimap moves down. That's expected, actually, because that's exactly what will happen. If you have the incorrect behavior in here, you don't multiply by that -1, it's not going to work. Okay, so we want to make sure we multiply by -1. That way, the world and the map are going in the same direction. They know to move in the same direction because they're better linking the world position to the minimap position. Okay? So at this point, you should have all this in. Now let's talk about these adds that you see here. So remember I said this is an offset? It is. This is the offset of where we want the camera to be. Remember what I said. If we don't have this offset in here, say we just multiply, you get top left. This is good. This gets us the zoom, but this doesn't get us where we need to be displaying this. We need to be displaying this amount of minimap wherever the player's at. Well, we use these nodes here to get the player position. Okay, now we need to combine our logic. And now we need to add these things together to get our result. So we want to add the X position after the multiplication to the subtraction node, the offset. And we want to add it to the division of the Y position in the size. Okay? So both the X and Y get this offset, and that's true, they should, because the player or the character can move both up and down and left and right. So the offset needs to be relative to both the X and the Y. Then we want to append these so that when we add them at the end here, we have UVs because UVs are a vector. It's two values, X and a Y, or a U and a V, quite literally. So append is putting them into a vector. We do need to put them in a specific order. So make sure your Y position is getting added to A and your X position is getting added to B. If you flip them, then you'll notice what happens here once it saves. So you'll see that it is facing the wrong direction. This time it's not that we're moving the wrong direction. When we move, it seems to follow the map pretty well, but you can see that it's literally flipped, like this is not the right side that I'm on. So it doesn't quite get my position correctly because it's rotated incorrectly. So we need to make sure we append them the right way, otherwise it's going to track our X and Y separately, and it's going to track them actually reversed, which we don't want that either. Now once these are appended, you have a vector of the appropriate coordinates to display for this texture sample. So we just have to add it to the zoom level. If you don't do this, it's technically fine. Like you could just skip the zoom level. But if you skip the zoom level, then you see how everything's wrong because it's got no zoom. And so it doesn't have an actual spot to show you. It's supposed to be showing the full thing the whole time, and now it's offsetting it. Okay, so that's definitely wrong. So we're going to add our zoom multiplied by our texture coordinate with our appended UV or X and Y position, and then we're going to pass that into our texture sample. Once you pass it in, you'll actually be good to go, but we should do a clamp here, as you see that we're doing, because the clamp will make it so it doesn't go above 1 or below 0. Notice if I don't use the clamp, then you can actually see it starting. It's what it's doing is it's actually tiling. So here's the texture starting over again. It's going above those values and it's restarting. So what you want to do is make sure that you have one more node before we wrap up here. We want to add a clamp node after this addition. And the clamp goes from 0 to 1 because UVs go from 0 to 1. You don't need to put in the min and max. By default, they're 0 and 1. But just pass that through directly into the UV. When you're done, you should get the center of the minimap as your starting point. And it should be zoomed in a little bit. It shouldn't be the full image. That's how you know you've done it correctly. At this point, you have an actual material that you can use, but when we display it on the HUD, we want to use an instance, not the regular material. So you can right-click on the material, create a material instance, and we want to call it whatever, something that you recognize. I just called it material underscore minimap instance. Okay, you don't have to do anything with that guy. You just need him because that's who we're going to throw on the HUD. Now, let's go to our widget for the minimap. So we got to make a minimap widget and then put this on it. In the character HUD, in the previous episode, we had a basic minimap image. You can see he's right here. He was set to visible. Let me hide the new one. He was set to visible, and he was just added directly on the HUD. It was just an image, and we grabbed the render target. I've now hidden him. I haven't gotten rid of him on the HUD, in case you ever want to use him again. I've disabled him through the eyeball, That way he's not showing up anymore here. And instead I've added the new Minimap widget, which we're going to add here in a second. So I just wanted to show you I've disabled the other one. It's still on the HUD, but we're not using it. Okay. Now let's make a new widget. Add user interface widget blueprint. I called it literally Minimap, but there are a lot of different files here, so you can call it Minimap widget if that's easier. This is super simple. Literally all I've done for this guy is used an image, brought it into the view here, called it Minimap image, left it a variable, or made it a variable rather. And then for the actual image on the brush, you'll have this brush that'll probably be empty when you start. And you can go ahead and choose the Minimap instance material. If it's not already, you can choose to also anchor it to the entire canvas, the entire widget. There you go. So it's going to take up the entire thing. This widget is just going to be this big. Now in here we do have to set the material collection parameters to the X and Y of the character. That way we can actually move around based on that offset, remember? So to do that, it's actually quite simple. We go into the event graph and you'll have like begin play or construct, pre-construct, and tick. You can just use event tick here. I got rid of the other two for now. If you need to manually bring it up, just literally search for event tick. It'll come up here. And then what we have to do is grab our variables and actually manually set them. You can set those values on the material parameter collection. Okay. So to do that is also simple. There's a node that says set scalar parameter value. There's also a set vector parameter value, but all of ours are scalars right now. We want to select the Minimap collection. For the parameter name, you can also manually select X position, and then I copy it, paste it, and select the Y position. Okay. You can see I've done that right here. And we have to set these to the corresponding values. So what we actually want to use is the character's X and Y position. Now, when we spawn the character HUD, we actually have the owner set to the character. So the character owns it. So if we put that Minimap then on the HUD, then the character will also own the Minimap widget by default. So if we don't change it, it will automatically own that. So we can use getOwningPlayerPawn, which is particularly useful in multiplayer scenarios too, because they can all have their own Minimap. And then we can grab their actor location. So getOwningPlayerPawn. This is our character. You don't even have to cast it to the right type because the location won't change based on the class itself. Get actor location. And then you can split the struct pin to have X, Y, and Z. Obviously for setting the scalar parameter X position, we pass in X. And for setting the scalar parameter Y position, we pass in the Y. And then this being on tick makes it so that this runs every frame. And that allows us to update it in real time. So now back on our character HUD, where we actually display everything to the user, we can now search for this widget right here. It'll be the widget icon, which is like 3 bars and a heart. And it'll be the name of your widget. Mine's just called Minimap. So I search Minimap and I can bring this onto the screen. I already have one, so I'm not going to do it again. I have renamed it to Minimap widget specifically. And you don't really have to change anything with it. Just set it where you'd like it, anchor it, size it, any of that stuff if you want to. But basically, if you just put it on the screen now, when you go to play the game, this should work. Only reason it might not work at that point, if everything else is done correctly, is the owning player pawn part. So I'll go through and just in case that was never set up for you, you can go into your character blueprint, which I defined right here, base character BP. And we actually set a HUD, okay, in begin play. We automatically spawn a HUD and set it to the default player controller, because right now that's all we have. but we pass in that as the owning player. So when the HUD is created, it automatically has an owning player. Then when we make the minimap a child of the canvas on the HUD, since the HUD is owned by that controller, the minimap is also owned by that controller. So that means that this get owning player pawn will succeed. Alright guys, and that is how you can set up a textured, stylized minimap in your first-person shooter tutorial series. With this, you'll see that the offset still isn't quite right because the offset on the image itself is actually a little bit off for me. So I was going to recommend that if you look at this, you see there's more on the top and less on the bottom. It's actually okay. I've kept the size of the image, and we can modify this more in the next episode. I'm going to show you why this matters and how we can do it when we can have an actual icon in here, like the player icon, because it makes it easier to see. It's a super simple change, and it won't require you to change anything with your actual minimap. It'll just require us moving around the image a little bit. So if you caught on to that, don't worry too much. It'll be solved in the next episode. But otherwise, your minimap should be good to go. This is the first iteration, and you can see, hopefully, a lot of the potential with it. Being able to actually use it to traverse the world and show the player where they're at. Displaying icons on it. And all sorts of other good stuff. So anyway, guys, thanks for sticking with me on this long episode. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys so much for all the love. I really, really am grateful for it. And honestly, I'm just so excited about what we can do with these series. I'm glad you guys are as well. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free. I'd be happy to get you settled with any of those issues, so that way you can continue along with the series. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.